Okay, at this time, Madam Clerk, if you would take roll call.
Mr. Combs?
Here.
Mr. Luther?
Here.
Ms. Nelson?
Here.
Ms. Reclue? Here. Ms. Sabacher? Here. Mr. Stone?
Present.
Mr. Washington?
Here.
Mr. West? Here. Thank you. 8 council members present, 0 absent.
Thank you. At this time, Pastor Williamson's here to do our invocation.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, as part of a great nation tonight, we must stop and remember those that are going through the struggles of mass shootings these last 72 hours. It's been overwhelming in our nation in at least 5 different locations. Whatever words, Lord, that we can speak on behalf of our fellow citizens, we speak tonight knowing that you're the only resolution to the trials of our day and the turmoils of our lives and our communities. Please see kindly, Lord, to help us in this new wave of violence in our country. Thank you, Lord, that our community is relatively quiet. But for this, it can be any community or village in our nation. So continue, Lord, to let us all work towards this together as a unified people, because it will take every one of us committed to that task faithfully and prayerfully. I also want to pray, Lord, tonight for MoDOT, for our county bridge and road, for our city street department, for our police officers and firefighters, EMTs and first responders, and those that man our ambulances. With the heartland in the eye of a winter storm, though it may not be long or perhaps severe, Lord, a lot of folks can be in harm's way without our first responders. Keep them safe as they help us through this next line of storms. Now, much closer to home to our city, I'm grateful, Lord, for those who faithfully serve our community every day, who help us all work together to achieve a good outcome for our patrons, for our families, for our workplaces, and the larger community of men. I pray, Lord, for our mayor and council persons, everyone who serves on boards and commissions on behalf of the city, and for everyone, Lord, who wears our emblem on their shirt, on their jacket, that works on our streets every day, and our police officers and emergency responders by night. Keep them safe, Lord, as they protect our citizens and the community that we cherish. I pray for this session. I pray for those, Lord, that are here to share from the community that makes government strong. And my prayer is, Lord, tonight that the discussions that are held and the decisions that are made in this session would first be pleasing to you. We ask your continued blessings on those in the city family who are bereaved, who are facing various and diverse physical and emotional ailments, that you touch them, love them, and where it's within your will, give them peace and healing. We pray all of this together with one voice in Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Face the flag. Attention, salute, and pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor.
Privilege, sir.
All right, at this time, we have comments from visitors. If you're present and would like to address the council, just step to the podium and give us your name and address, and limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, please. And seeing no one come forward, we'll move on. Normally, we have consent agenda. Tonight, we do not have any items for discussion, so we'll move on to our Director of Administration report for December. And you've all been presented that in your packet. And we would entertain any questions. One night we pull it and we're not going to have any questions. Come on, guys.
Okay. Mr. Mayor? Yes, sir. Okay, I'm on page 21 of the fire department. We had 192 incidents in the month of December. And then the next page shows that they've increased, on page 22, they've increased 40.69% from the previous year. Do we know why we're seeing an increase in there? I mean, probably subjection or whatever, but.
Good evening, Kevin Kofelt, Fire Chief, City of Fulton. The major increase in these calls are medical calls. We've seen a lot of calls since the hospital shut down. And we're also running some additional calls out in the county. A lot of the county departments are running short on personnel, and we're getting called more often out there to help mutual aid.
Mutual aid, okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for, you and your department for doing that, so, yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. So, oh, wait, before you go, Kevin, sorry, I should. So, we seeing any, since we're having increased usage, how's our equipment faring and that sort of thing? And I know that's subjective too, but.
Well, we replenish our supplies with Callaway Ambulance. That was an agreement when we run with them. We
Okay.
try to get our supplies back from off their medic unit, whatever we used on scene.
Okay,
Our increase in runs are, it's doing some, it's wearing out our vehicles.
Okay.
We're running more calls, so our vehicles are on the road more often, and our fuel usage has went up. I think we were $9,000 over budget last year on fuel.
okay,
But we're working on vehicle now,
yeah,
getting purchase a new vehicle.
okay, so that's where I was wanting to go with that was, the vehicle, since we're having more calls, obviously, we're putting more mileage on them and they don't last forever. Most of them we've gotten are been used anyway, right?
Right, and a lot of our calls, when we go down to a 4-man minimum, and we can't just send one truck out on a call with 2 people on. A lot of the calls, we have to roll both trucks on call, so a lot of those calls, 2 trucks are responding to the calls.
Okay,
Mr.
right.
Cofield.
Thank you.
As you said, that we have an increase on making more runs to help and support for that. Are we looking to be compensated from the county any for the fuel uses?
No, we have a mutual aid agreement. They come in and help us, and we go out and help them. And there's no charges either way. It's a mutual aid agreement, and the auto aid agreement that we do with Central Fire helps our ISO rating to have that mutual auto aid agreement as well. So, we don't charge any type of funding for going out and assisting. It's an
We
agreement.
want to look into that if we continue to make a lot of more runs somewhere. Somebody has to put that cost other than us if we're doing more runs there.
Well, most of our calls are inside the city, but we have increased responding out into the county a little bit, but nothing drastically, but there has been an increase in them.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Okay, any other questions on the report? I would entertain a motion.
So move for acceptance of December Director of Administration report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. Very good. Next up, presentation of our December financial statement.
Candy Johnson, Finance. December was 3 pay period month, in addition to the 3rd payroll. A week of time worked in December, but paid in January is accrued back to 2022, so consequently the expenses will be higher. 11 months of sales tax have now been recorded. Collections are 5.6% higher than the same period in the prior year. Use tax revenue is up 8.8%. December is what we call a soft close, so some entries will be accrued back to December as part of our usual year-end process. So if anybody has any questions? Be happy to answer.
Thank you, Candy. Very good. We appreciate Ms. Johnson for filling in for, as our interim CFO right now. She's doing a fantastic job. Thank you. All right. I would entertain a motion on this as well.
Move to accept the financial report as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. Very good. Next up, we have unfinished business, which we would like to get this untabled if possible, and so we can discuss it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. This is to untable the discussion of our deviation for street width for Willow Creek subdivision. Any questions or concerns on this untabling? Hearing none, all those in favor say yes. Yes. And opposed, no.
No.
Madam Clerk, do you have the count on that?
We have 7 affirmative and 1 opposed.
Very good. So we do have this up for discussion again. And Mr. Brummer, if you would, did we get any information more?
Good evening, Kyle Brimmer, City Engineer. I did speak with a representative from Lewis and Beatty, the engineer for the developer, this week. He was intending to be here tonight. I don't know if the weather detoured him or not. But in the discussion with Mr. Corman, with Lewis and Beatty, I asked him how much he thought the additional street width would cost. His commentary was, his ballpark figure was about $5,000 per lot, and there's about 62 lots in there. So more than $300,000 he felt that would add to the development of the street. Again, I asked him if he was going to be here tonight, and he was planning to be to talk about any further changes that would have to be made in regards to the number of lots. The sheer number of lots may go down because of the right-of-way changes that would be necessary and whatnot. But I cannot speak to those because he's not here.
Did we ever get a copy of the original plans?
Excuse me?
A copy, I know that we had talked about looking at a copy of the original plans from when they had spec'd it out. Whenever, what was it, 2018, 2017?
Yeah, in 2018, when the original sketch plat was
Yeah.
produced. I can get you a copy of that.
Okay. And can you tell me, did they own the property at that time? Or was it something that they were potentially going to purchase down the road?
I do not know the answer.
Dennis shared with me earlier that they actually owned it, but in 2020 it changed names, if you will. But they owned it back then. They changed names in 2020, and then it was for sale again in 2021.
It looks
You
like
made
we
it.
have our rep here.
Yeah. Bart, I'll introduce you if you're ready. Bart Corman with Lewis and Beatty has just showed up, so we're talking about the subdivision presently.
Sorry about that. Yeah, as Kyle said, I'm Bart Corman with Lewis and Beatty. Working on the Willows. And we've had a sketch plat from a few years ago. So the intention on that southern piece that's in front of you guys for rezoning was going to be some mixed single and duplex development in there. So we have the rezoning request. And so is there any questions on that? I guess first. Is this the workshop or is this the
This is the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about the street width.
Okay.
Right now, the zoning will be coming in after this. So
Okay,
street width.
sure. So street width. So street width, when we started the development, city code was 26 feet wide, curb and gutter streets, and that's what the phases that have been constructed are under. Commons Drive was widened in conjunction with the city for a request to extend that as a wider width because of the cut-through traffic that'll eventually go over to the ball fields. So you'll see that as a wider street in that development, but that was in a partnership with the city to do so. The rest of it was all 26 feet wide, which meets your city fire codes, or your international fire codes, sorry, pardon me on that, and is what's fairly standard for residential subdivision development. So when you change your code, it requires the city to grant permission to do one-sided parking on the street and do it 28 feet wide. And so that's what we're here to request. That's 2 foot wider than what we were expecting, but we can still do that with 50-foot right-of-way and make that work without a problem. So we're just asking for that. I know there was some concerns about parking on the street and some other things like that. Going through that subdivision, most of the problems I'm assuming are not on the single-family residential part because you have a 2-car wide driveway because they have 2-car garages, and so most of the cars are probably not on that street, even though there's parking on one side. You're probably more concerned about the duplexes because most of those have like a 1-car garage, and so you have less off-street parking per that. So that's probably a concern. Some of the things that can be addressed to do so is to require a 30-foot setback instead of a 25, which will allow for 30 plus about 10, 11 feet, so almost 40 feet. So you can stack 2 cars, one behind each other on that, on all those duplexes. If that's a concern, I think that can be done because those driveways would be constructed as it's built. So that's why we're here to ask for that allowance to go to the 28 feet wide.
So, yeah, basically what happened, we amended changed our code to this new 36-foot wide
Right.
minimum standard. And I don't know, this is something that I know is kind of pre-approved, but yeah, it's definitely called for council action if we want to approve this change.
Right. Sure. Well, yeah, no, we're okay with the 28. We're okay with the 28, going from 26 to 28.
Okay, so you'll go to 28?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't feel that's safe with as much, when you drive through the area right now, and I know you're adding on to it, with families and children and whatever, we've got emergency vehicles that have to enter, we have snow plows, all kinds of maintenance of things. I think the 28-foot is too narrow. And I live in a subdivision where it's wider and I feel safer. So in my opinion, I don't feel the 28-foot can accommodate that area.
Sure. And that's understandable. Like you to think about it just a little bit. When you have a little narrower road and you do have some parking on the side, you slow traffic down. And so if you think about it, when you start widening out traveling lanes, usually you're talking for a higher rate of speed. I'm not a traffic engineer for the specialty and the mentality of that, but I've done a lot of parking lots and stuff like that. And if you create those traffic calming devices whether naturally or unnaturally, you can slow that traffic down. And so when you widen it out, you're going to actually have a natural tendency for folks to travel faster. And so I want you to consider that, because I think long-term, if you go to a lot wider street and that's an easier traveled path without any things to slow people down, you're going to actually have more problems later on, people complaining about too fast in their subdivisions. So take that under advisement. I mean, I want you to talk to your engineers and your experts on that. But I've done that in the past. When I've done parking lots, I've put some narrow islands to slow folks down. And just think about it like this. When you go into your bank, when you go to the drive-through in the bank, those are very narrow aisles, right? Does anybody speed through those aisles? Not hardly at all, because it's so narrow. It creates a mental way to slow folks down. So take that under consideration. I would ask for you to do so.
Al, in your opinion, is there a way to compromise it to any degree to alleviate some of the concern and still not have to go with that full 36-foot wide street? And what would be the benefit if we went to, say, 30 or 32?
I think a compromise potentially could be made. You know, I just cannot speak for the developer and what their abilities are and what they'd be willing to do during this consideration phase, I would say. But you know, 32-foot wide, that would be similar to a Tanglewood subdivision, a Southwind subdivision, and I guess as Bart mentioned, we have had issues in both of those subdivisions as far as trying to slow traffic down, some complaints about slowing traffic down. So, you know, still, even at that 32-foot wide, you have that situation. You know, I do think, you know, as you mentioned or alluded to earlier, Lau, is that, you know, the original sketch plat was done in 2018. You know, I think that for this addition to this subdivision, a 36-foot wide street does not fit with what is already there. So that's my opinion, and that's why I suggested last meeting that I thought 28-foot wide parking on one side would be sufficient. But yes, somewhere in the middle, you know, I wouldn't, you know, that could be a you know, some potential to kind of float the middle there.
I have a concern. If we approve this time, can we get in trouble in the future if we don't approve the next person? Can we? Like, we don't put ourselves in jeopardy, no liability there.
We may have to answer some very specific questions of why we voted yes, what was our logic behind it that would not be met with somebody else. If somebody else came along with the exact same or similar plat with similar, you know, number of houses and all of that, then we would very much have to explain ourselves of why we agreed to one and not the other if everything was exactly the same. But it's legal. We can say yes, we can say no anytime permission is requested of us.
Yeah, but I think to Lauren's point, if you set a precedent, you know, you kind of want to be careful about doing that. But this is a little different situation because you have that prior approval of the original plat, and that was the intent. So, I mean, I think we'd be fine on this situation.
Mr. Mayor? But
Yes, sir.
the previous intent was to have two-way traffic. We had to change that because of concerns with getting emergency vehicles in there, so we had to make it parking on one side only.
Right.
Right? And, you know, unless there's an incident there, I would doubt if, or a complaint, I doubt there's gonna be a lot of tickets written because people are parked on both sides of the street. And, you know, until we have an incident where people are parked on both sides of the street, we can't get an emergency vehicle through, then we're gonna have an issue. And I think we may be, if we say yes to this and no to someone else in the future, we might be opening the city up for lawsuits as well. I don't think it was a good idea to have approved it in the past, but, you know, we can't turn back the clock. And then why do we have a standard if we're not gonna, if we're gonna let deviations happen?
Mr. Mayor, if I could add to that, your code does allow from a deviation upon city council approval. So it's in your code to allow for that. And in our case is we started this development, the code changed, and so that's our argument. Obviously, if we were coming here new with a brand-new development, you know, straight off the paper, ready to do something, obviously I'd have a harder argument to make in front of this council to allow for that deviation. But that is, you know, whoever your city attorney is, they did a good job of laying this out and giving you that flexibility, yet giving you the teeth as well in your code there for that.
And ultimately, it is up to the city council, what you guys want to do with this. We did table it last meeting, and, you know, I was hoping we might get a little bit more information, but it didn't seem like we have, you know, much more to go on than we did before, but, you know.
No, one item that was brought up was what does this plan look like, right? I think that's a piece of it that would help, I know myself, to see what's the potential traffic flow gonna look like with the undeveloped potential of property that's out there, such as park and ball fields that may end up out in that area in the future and could be a through street. Now, what's that look like? And also, there's several zoning questions that I don't know if it's saved for this one or for later on, but in my mind, the zoning needs to be answered first before we really can settle on what the right result is for the street width. So I don't know if we want to talk about zoning yet, but it's, in my mind, they're connected. I mean, we need to understand the zoning versus what the street requirements are going to be.
One more thing I would add too is that one of the items that was on the agenda last meeting and is finishing up hopefully this meeting is a traffic engineering assessment study that has street widths as part of that study. You know, I would suggest to you that where we've gotten in trouble in the past is not letting engineering and planning professionals provide the widths for the types of roads. And that's where, to me, I think we've gotten in trouble in the past. I think we rely on engineering standard to provide us the correct width of streets for the type of street and where they're located at. You know, I think that you guys can fall back on that. You're still going to see it. You know, you would still be able to see it. You know, the plat still got to go through you guys. You know, what our new code has in it is this additional step. You know, if it's anything other than 36 foot wide, I would suggest that you let engineering standards make those decisions for you, and you can rely on those decisions. It's still, with your final say-so, it's still going to go through you guys in the platting process anyways. So you're still going to get to see it eventually. But
Kai, I agree with you. I think it's important that we let the professionals, the engineering department, do their job. So I'm with you on that.
So do we need an actual answer on this tonight, or we could table it again for another meeting and talk about the zoning a little bit more?
I think I've got a couple more things real quick on
Yeah.
that. One, he's talking about engineering planning this Reviewing some of the general guidelines on road widths, I would agree with what you're saying. But I also found in there that there's some general guidelines that the road should be like 90 degrees, perpendicular to each other, parallel, like all the roads should be running that way. I think some of the issues that we're running into in this particular neighborhood is that they didn't follow those guidelines. And so that's where, roads, it has a hard time getting through there, along with the traffic issues that you had addressed before. Based on that information, based on the fact that the property is currently zoned agriculture, as well as trying to plan for the future of the city, not knowing where things are going to go. I live off Coates and Desson, and it's an extremely busy street, and I'm sure at the time it was probably zoned properly, or probably engineered properly for what it is. It just doesn't handle the traffic that we have now, and it's dangerous for kids that are wanting to play out there. I'd like to see us stick with what we've got, just thinking for the future, versus just trying to figure out what works right now. I know the subdivision on the other end of Tennyson that has residential housing has roads that I believe are pretty close to 36, because it's got parking on both sides as well as room to drive down 2 cars. It's coming in off C. I'm not sure the exact width, I didn't go out and measure it, but I believe it's right there. And it looks fair for those houses who may have people coming, have people parking in their driveway. I mean, I would let my kids play out there. And so I'd like to see us kind of match that, if you will, and planning for the future versus just looking at things right now. No, actually not South Winds. If you're coming off C, directly across from Heartland Church.
Is that the
We're right about there.
Briarwood Trail? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Briarwood
it's coming
Trail.
off C. It's just like, I don't know, 6 or 8 houses. Yeah, and across the apartments, yeah, right in there. Yeah, so those houses have the wider streets. I don't know, I can't remember, I don't think they have sidewalks. But it is a wider street there, and I think it looks well done.
Mr. Mayor, due to the fact that we have ordinance 1667 yet to discuss this evening that is impacting our code, as well as the zoning code that we have to discuss, and the many questions that I believe that this council still has about this, I'd like to make a motion to table this until the next scheduled council meeting.
The motion is to move this forward, keep it tabled. And the zoning may very well affect the decision-making on this. In the meantime, if it does stay alive, I would like to see a little bit more of, what the street's going to look like in relation to what's already there and what, where the outlet and the inlet's going to be for these streets, that type of thing. To me, that seems to, would be helpful in the decision-making.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
we need housing here in town. We definitely do. There's no problem
Thank
there.
you.
And we welcome you, that's for sure. We're just trying to make sure that we can make the right decisions for you and for us. And that we really do want these houses in this town. Thank you.
And we don't want to be known as a community that hinders that. We want to help it, but yet it needs to be done the right way. So, yeah,
I totally understand.
yeah. So let's keep working on it.
Mr. Mayor, I do have a question while we're still in the discussion phase. If there was a compromise suggested that is not the 28 feet, that was 30, 32, still with the one-way or one-sided parking, what's the protocol for that at this point where we stand right now? And I guess I'm looking to our former city clerk and our current city clerk to help navigate this, because this was brought to us as a request. This really isn't an ordinance or a resolution, but I guess I'm curious, what protocol do we follow if we did want to get into a negotiating stance?
Well, I'm looking to our current city clerk, and I think we're very fortunate tonight that our city councilor is here with us who put together this verbiage allowing a deviation. So I think between those two individuals, we could get an excellent explanation.
Played.
Good job, Assistant Director of Administration.
Mr. Riley, would you mind, have you been paying attention to this conversation a little bit? So I know you're a busy guy, but to deviate from what they're requesting to a compromise with, instead of going from the standard of 36 down to 28, if we went instead to a 30 or 32, would that just take a motion from a council member to make that deviation?
You've got the legislative authority to deviate, and I don't think that deviation requires only a deviation of 28, and it would just be a council decision on the deviation point. So if there were some negotiations going on, if I understood that correctly, I don't think it would require a new ordinance or any other procedure. Then the terms of the deviation would be decided by the council by its own motion, and that would be sufficient because it's already in the ordinance that you can deviate from it. If that makes sense.
So at the point that we're ready to agree or approve something, that's when we word it in that motion to then be seconded and approved at that point? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation.
So for those watching, our council did say that, our legal counsel did say that would be fine, just take a motion from our city council to make that deviation, what they want it to be. So we'll keep working on it. Any other questions?
Have you put together the numbers to know, I know that Kyle had kind of touched on that a little bit. Can you go over that with us again, the cost differential between how it's spec'd out at 28 and then
Then to 36.
Mhm.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you break it down, I mean, I did really rough, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 a lot would be the cost differential, because of street and pavement. And I did not put any interest in situation or anything like that. I mean, that was just a quick deal, because just to understand development, the infrastructure goes in first, okay? And so you have all that upfront cost, and then you sell lots as the market lets you and as you can build homes. And so that upfront cost is that kicker, because you're carrying that cost out over time longer than in the home construction itself. Because in home construction, you know, you get that done in about 6 months, you sell it and go on down the road. Where when you put some of this infrastructure in, whether it's streets or especially sewer, you know, things like that, where you got to go off-site or tie that stuff in, you have to put a lot of that in just to get to the first lot. And if the market downturns, then as we remember 10, 12 years ago, what happened is a lot of guys just got under because they couldn't sell fast enough at a reasonable rate to do that. And so when you're doing the development, the less upfront costs, the better for a developer, okay? I mean, that's their model. You know, but that's about the cost, is $2,000 to $5,000 a lot. Where if that cost was put in additional driveway or something like that, it could be the same number, but it would be on the back end when they have somebody to buy it, instead of carrying it out over 2 to 3 years.
So do you feel like that if we negotiated and we said 32 feet, and then you also offset the driveway so you could put 2 cars in that would be better cost for you?
It'd probably be about, yeah, because so going from 28 to 32 is halfway already, and so then doing the driveways in addition, it's probably, other than the time, probably about the same cost, immediate time. So it probably wouldn't be overly advantageous, but it would be something that I could have my client consider. Where if you would stick with, you know, a 28 and do the longer driveways, especially on that multifamily, where I think you guys are considering the problem is more prevalent than the single family. You know, that cost, when he does the duplexes, would be there at the tail end, because you build the house, and then the driveway is one of the last things you do on the outside, to do so. So that cost is more immediate in that aspect, as well as you can get by with the driveway. I believe most of them are 4 inches thick. I don't know if city code requires more than 4 for residential driveways compared to a city street that's 6 inches thick. So there's a little savings there as well.
I guess I don't love the idea of pre-negotiating what the driveways are mandated to be in the future, a future that we don't know, a future that you don't necessarily know what your company may or may not be able to do 2 years down the road, or 3 or 4 years down the road, who may own the property, you know, how that may change hands. All those things can change from year to year, and this project may take, you know, multiple years or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just have concern about that.
Sure. The enforcement of the driveway length is directly proportional to the front building line requirement. So you got a 25-foot front building line requirement. Okay, so you got 25 feet there that building sets back off the right-of-way, and you got about 10 feet in the right-of-way driveway. So you got about 35 feet is what you got currently now. You go to a 30-foot building line, then you got a 40-foot basically length of driveway. So then you can fit 2 vehicles in a 40-foot length, 20 feet each, which is your standard parking spot in your commercial areas. So you
In
can.
theory, I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I just worry about the code and how that would affect, you know, whatever
Right.
future deal we make with you. What if it's not you?
Right, and it would be in the
Or your
construction
company.
plans, it would be part of the preliminary plat, so yeah.
And obviously, as far as the council and working with you, we all want to get to the best, safest, right decision, right? But at what point does the process, will it start delaying progress on this project?
Oh, well, if you ask any developer, including my client, you know, every day is, you know, a day that's holding them up, okay? I mean, that's just, he would have loved to already started construction, but obviously I still got this process here, then I got to submit a preliminary plat, and then construction plans, and then get all the permits. So, you know, 2 weeks here is not the end of the world, because it's early in the process. It would be worse if we were halfway through the process and then you know, had a situation on this ordinance, because the lot layout, the right-of-way layout, and all that come in early to play. And so I got to nail this down early instead of later.
I agree. I don't think we should be kicking the can down the street too far. We need to try to wrap this up probably by the next council meeting.
Very good. Any other discussion on this? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor say yes,
Yes.
and opposed, no.
No.
And Madam Clerk, you have that count? Yeah. Okay.
7. Yes.
7 and 1, yep.
Thanks, Al.
And that was Councilman Combs. Yep. Okay, very good. Next up, we have new business. Our one item tonight is the topic of Juneteenth. We do have a representative from Human Rights tonight to talk about food vendors and fun.
Hello, Sherry Lococo, Human Rights Commission, and here we have.
Tom Clapp, Human Rights Commission. And we're just here to ask to do the same thing we did last year. And the exception that's made is for charging for food service and possibility of sales booths for individuals. Same exception we had last year. we'd like to continue to build the Juneteenth celebration. Any questions? This could
Move.
actually be quick.
Move for approval.
Second.
And I see the location's gonna be at Legends. It's just, yeah. Very good.
Are there food trucks that are set up out there?
That's the hope.
That's-
Okay. And like out in the parking lot and booths out in the parking lot, or will there be anything inside and outside?
Both.
Okay, great.
And last year was hot. And thank God for the
Inside, yeah,
Legends.
it worked really well, but it was a
very
good
well.
party.
Yeah, it was.
I'd like to
Very-
thank
very
Renee
great.
for that leadership on that. Appreciate that, Renee.
Yeah. All righty, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or other discussion? I'll call for that question. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. All right, thank you all for being here.
Thank our esteemed council and you three too.
Oh, man, get out of here, Tom. All right, next up, we have council concerns, and at this time, council members may discuss matters or concerns not on the agenda. Council liaisons to city boards and commissions will also provide a brief review of the most recent meeting. And I'll start with Councilman West.
All right, so planning and zoning has not met since our last council meeting. There is one scheduled for February the 8th to discuss the zoning on the property we recently annexed for the county out on, well, I call it Airport Road. So anyway, County Road 304, so that'll come up on February the 8th.
Very good.
And as far as council concerns, I have none. I want to express thanks to our ADOA, Courtney. I texted her Friday late morning and asked that the street sweeper be run in my area, not necessarily just in my neighborhood, and the guys came out and did an excellent job. There's been some recent utility work going on, not by us, by others, and a lot of dirt and mud on the street, so that was appreciated that you all came out and did that. And Kyle's not in the room either.
I was
but-
going to say, thanks to Kyle's people.
Yeah.
But thank you, I appreciate it.
I even stopped the truck and told the guys thanks, so.
Yeah, and
Anyway.
folks, reach out to your council members. They can be helpful at times, so, yeah.
Every now and then.
Yep. All righty, next up, Councilwoman Seebacher.
Yes, hello, Mr. Mayor. I have no concerns. We have had a park board meeting, and Clay, I'm going to butcher this, so you can come on up and help me if you'd like. First off, we met our new Assistant Director to Parks and Rec, Tara O'Shea. She seems, did I say her name right, O'Shea?
Yes.
She's very enthusiastic, which I loved. A lot of good ideas coming from her, and excited to see what happens and what she can help us with in the future. We talked about disc golf and the potential to add a new park. Clay was going to put together a cost estimate for that. Have you gotten to any of that yet?
No, Clay Caswell, Director of Parks and Recreation. No, I'm still working on the cost proposal for that project.
We talked about the Recplex and our year-end report. If my numbers are correct, we ended 2022 with 620 members and just shy of 59,000 visitors for all of '22. So that was, I think, a positive report. I loved hearing that. We also discussed changing the hours, and I'm glad that we're having this chance to talk about that because the question came up at the meeting about changing the hours on Friday night due to, I want to call it lack of attendance, but that sounds kind of negative, changing the closing time to 7 o'clock. And that did pass with the park board, but has that gone on any of our social medias or anything to?
It has not.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the council. Friday night is a slow night. I think I look back over all the Fridays last year, we averaged 2 visitors. We still had a lot of people using the fitness center and cardio room through the 24/7 access. So our proposal was to cut it back to 7:30, closing time on Friday night. The board recommended that we take it to 7 o'clock. That way it was consistent with Saturday and Sunday. So that was their recommendation. And I guess if the council doesn't have any objections tonight, we'll move forward with that.
What is it currently, Clay?
9 o'clock on Friday nights.
Thank you.
Clay, I had a question. This is during the wintertime hours. What about the summer hours?
No, this is all year long.
The only question summer times it may be used a little bit more on Fridays.
Well, like I said, I looked at all the 52 Fridays throughout the year. 29 of those Fridays had 0 visitors during that 7 to 9 time slot. I think one time we had 9 visitors during the winter. So,
The question I have was that it's possibility that the notoriety, we starting to get picking up more people and they getting more interested, and it's a possibility that they might decide, hey, yes, only if there's an interest. Maybe we have a sign up says anyone interested in time being extended or something. Maybe we can visit this something like this a little bit later on too.
yeah, and I think we're constantly monitoring that and checking the times, the busiest times, the slow times. There's probably going to be some Fridays throughout the year where we have activities, and we may stay open longer just for that activity.
And that doesn't pertain to the people that have the 24-hour
Now,
access?
24/7 access will still be available.
Perfect. And what all does that include?
It gets you into the back half of the building, which is the fitness center, the cardio room, the basketball arena, the turf field, and the track.
I was just gonna say, you might, continue to monitor it. I mean, how many visitors do you normally have between 5 and 7, I mean, on a Friday night? I could see where Friday would be slow, because there's a lot of other things going on. It's the start of the weekend, all that. That makes sense to me.
We do get a lot around 5 to 6, people getting off work.
Okay.
A lot of the after-school kids are still hanging around.
Okay.
So usually around that 6:37, 7 o'clock time frame, it starts to slow down a little bit.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Do we need to make that some sort of council approval, or is that already okay since the park board approved that?
I think that's up to, Clay and his staff, if that's a matter of trying to streamline, which I appreciate, and make it a little bit more profitable. I don't think that's up to us
Yeah.
to say.
It
but-
was approved by the park board, so, yeah.
Minor
Moving on
change.
to Tanglewood,
Can I ask a quick question? I'm so sorry
Yeah, no, that's okay.
about the Recplex. Have we considered doing some sort of snow day program? I know there's a lot of parents that don't have care on snow days. Is it possible to do something like that?
We have not considered that, but we can think about it. Right now, our biggest focus on a snow day is making sure we get everything shoveled and get the parking lot clear. So we have lots of discussions about snow, so we'll put that into the discussion. And
I just think there's just so many people in our community that are working parents, and it might be something beneficial. And I know that it might be something hard to put together because it's so last minute sometimes, but I do think that I know for myself, I would take advantage of it every time, just because I work here in Fulton, and our expectation is to be there even when it snows. But I don't have anything to do with my child.
yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I think we can have something put in place and ready to go, so when that does happen. Okay.
Good idea.
I think it's a great idea. I love that. Okay, are we ready? Okay. No, you're fine, you're fine.
Tanglewood.
Interrupt with all the good ideas you want. Tanglewood, the close of the year was a new record of 1,007,000, which is awesome. Hold on, I'm gonna pull this up a little bit more here. That was annual revenue, 9.2% above the 21 revenue. So really, really awesome numbers that Tanglewood is putting up. They too have proposed a change, not to hours, but to rates on daily passes, not annual passes, but just on daily passes, and that was something that the board had discussed. I think that one passed as well by the board too, correct?
Yeah.
To change that rate?
And I think in my discussions with Director Tyler, I think that's something that we'll bring to the council for approval.
Perfect.
Am I correct in saying that?
And then next meeting was set for April 6th, 23 at 5:30 PM at the Recplex. So that's the highlight reel.
Very good, thank you. All right, next up, Councilwoman Reclus.
Yes, there was no meeting for the traffic commission since our last meeting here. We have a lot of things going on. We just discussed, spent half hour on a subject. We got spring coming, things like that we need to look forward to. We need to go out and evaluate the roads in town, see what we need to do, put on our budget to see what we can afford to do and whatever. I just want to, also with the snow coming, supposedly, we'll see when we get. I just hope everyone's safe. Everyone look out for each other, be careful, and that's all I have this evening.
Very good. And those that don't need to park on the street, don't park on the street? Yeah, thank you. Next up, Councilman Stone.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The Historic Preservation Commission did meet last week. I was unable to attend due to illness. And I did want to say that with my new employment, I'm not going to be able to meet the current schedule for how they meet. They meet during the day on Tuesdays. I know I did put it out there for the commission to possibly entertain a different day of the week or different time to meet. But if the commission does choose to keep I guess it's the second Tuesday of the month at 1 p.m., then we'll need a different council liaison going forward. And then I have no concerns, but I do have a thank you. It's not my ward, but the street lights are going up over in the Willow Creek subdivision. And I've gotten a couple of constituents that live in that area that passed on the thank yous for that. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Excellent, thank you. All right, next up, Councilman Luther.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there has been no airport advisory board meeting since our last council meeting. I have no council member concerns, just send an early appreciation for our street crews, our fire, and our police as we do prep and respond to any potential incidents that do come with this snowstorm. So thank you for all those that will be supporting us through this weather.
Very good. Next up, Councilman Combs.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the Human Rights Commission meets next Monday, so we haven't met since last time. So I'll have something the next meeting, and no concerns this evening.
All righty, Councilman Washington.
No concerns at this time.
Okay, and Councilwoman Nelson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to pull up this email real quick. Had somebody reach out to Councilman Washington and I today, and Kyle, I'm not sure if maybe you were tagged on this as well. I didn't see that. A sinkhole has formed under the mouth of the culvert that runs under E Industrial Road between the corner of it and North Bluff Street. It can be seen clearly by driving on North Bluff. They were concerned that this could turn into something a lot more major. So, okay, that sounds great. And if you want me, they attach the coordinates. So if you'd like me to send this email to you, I'm happy to do that. So I will forward that on to you. No other concerns other than I agree with Councilman Luther in thanking our street crews ahead of time. Park on one side of the road. And then utility board did meet. They did want to pass on the recommendation for I know last time we met, there was some discussion about how to proceed with nominations for boards and commissions. The utility board didn't want to go ahead and make a recommendation on the candidate putting in the request for the board, each committee or each board or commission looking over those, possibly sitting down with the candidate and then passing the recommendation on to the mayor, and then it being placed on the agenda. So that recommendation was made by the utility board, and no other large updates. Is that correct, Daryl?
Very good. So, just so I'm clear, did you go ahead and approve Mr. Algier?
We did not.
You did not yet? Okay, very good.
No,
So
we would like to
waiting.
take the opportunity to sit down and chat with him first, and then make the recommendation to move forward with that As with every board or commission, we would like everybody to have that opportunity. So when somebody applies for the position, submits their want, then we would like to take the opportunity, each board and commission, to have the opportunity to, so I hate to use the word vet because it sounds so stern, but just to make sure that we feel like that they're the best candidate. As many recommendations as our boards and commissions make to the council, we would just want to make sure that we have the best and most qualified candidates.
So that would take kind of a work session and some action on the council to change that process, I think. Is that not correct? To be different than the process we normally use.
That was my complaint before, is that we didn't, when it came to this gentleman here, all the other previous ones, we just went ahead and approved them. But when it came to him, we want to change the process. I don't have any problem with that for the future, but I had a problem with it for that particular individual. So if we're going to do something like that, I agree with you, Mayor, maybe we need to have something to discuss. Are we going to do for every committee, are we going to go through a vetting process for people that we ask to be on the board? Are we going to go through that? We need to do that if we need to do that.
Exactly. That's my point.
And that was the recommendation by the utility board, is to move forward with that process for every board and commission moving forward.
Yeah, so in my opinion, that would take council action to change that process. Am I wrong on that?
I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of just the way we've always done it. I don't know that it's really written down anywhere how we do it, but I think I like the idea, but as an example, planning and zoning, 1 year went almost a year without meeting, so I mean, that might be tough for some of those, unless we call a special meeting just to talk to someone, which is possible, I guess, but, you know, I think it's a good idea.
Either that or clearly state that each board and commission can sort of have a little bit of say-so on the process they want to use. I don't know.
Sure, I don't know. Maybe it's a good work session discussion.
I think it'd be an excellent work session, because I'm afraid we might swing the pendulum too much the other way. That's my initial knee jerk.
Yeah, we don't want a
is-
free-for-all.
Right.
Well, we don't want, but we also don't want to limit participation by our citizens
Right.
simply because they might not be liked by certain people on a commission. That's my concern. We just need to watch and see how it swings.
And as we were talking about that in the U-Board meeting, you know, the ironic part is not a single person knows this particular candidate, so nobody can speak to who they are as a person, and I think that kind of raised the concern as well, as do we know that they are, as many recommendations as are made, do we know that we feel good about the candidate? And once they talk to them, once the board talks to them, I think that there's a good possibility that the answer could be yes. And I think that that's the only request, is that we have a little bit more of a process instead of just having somebody that's put in.
I have a question. Where is the written policy for this? I have not seen one. So I have the charter. It's not in the charter. It just refers to the administrative code. So is there a process?
It's just a practice.
Right, but is it even a written practice?
Probably not.
I don't know that it's written.
Sounds like a work session.
Yeah, Miss ADOA can answer. Go ahead.
Good to answer, I think. There is not a written process on this. Basically, what it does state is that these board and commission members are appointed by the mayor with the consent of the council. As you guys have stated in the past, that has been an application process. It wouldn't take any formal action by the city council to change that process unless you want to create a written policy. So there wouldn't be a process stating that the Human Rights Commission has to have the council approval before they vet a candidate for it to then come back, if that makes sense.
Also, I'd just like to add, I understand where the councilwoman is coming from. In other places that I've worked, the vetting, and I hate using the term vetting as well, but the review process has also been more so, it's a twofold thing. A lot of times people sign up for things. That doesn't mean that they know what it is that is entailed in that particular commission. In other places that I've served at, you know, with their application, they provided their statement, their resume, and the council did get to look over it. And in fact, they were invited to council meeting and introduced themselves. So I'm sure that with a good work session, we can derive an actual process, and that would be fair and equitable, you know, and encourage citizens to apply.
When Mr. Algiers' form come through, I actually recommended him to the mayor. I have worked with him in the past, and I know him to be a pretty reputable person. So that's where that come from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, you know, I think the process can be talked about, and I don't know if it, yeah. I just want to be fair.
And I think it should be the same for every board and commission. And like Mike was saying, you know, they only meet on a need to meet basis. But you know, as we're moving forward in this process too, and what we're trying to envision our city looking like, I hope that maybe you're meeting more often because we're aspiring for these large dreams.
There's been a lot very lately, so I hope that continues as well. It's great to get that group together. Okay.
We're very blessed to have a community that does get involved, and they volunteer their time, and that means a lot, and we do appreciate that. So, yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Could we get a short break if we're finished there?
Already?
Yes, it's been an hour.
Okay, so we're through, were you done, Councilwoman Nelson? Yes. Okay. All right, so before we move on to resolutions, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Okay, I think Michael's got us back live. We'll call this meeting back to order. Next up on our agenda, we have resolutions. Councilwoman Seebacher, if you would present resolution number 3471.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Resolution number 3471, a resolution authorizing the filing of an application with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources Clean State Revolving Fund Program for an integrated management plan grant under the Missouri Clean Water Law, Chapter 644 RSMO. I make a motion to adopt resolution number 3471 at this council meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a resolution here. And I guess, Darrell, would you mind coming up?
Darrell Dunlap Utilities. This is actually set up for subdivisions and stuff like that that's outside the corporate limits that has problems with their sewer system existing. And the state they issue grants to do a study, and part of that study will be, is this the best alternative to what they have? So you would have to meet with the homeowners association, and you'd have to develop rates, which we don't have developed for outside the city limits for wastewater, except for one customer. And you will propose that back to the state with the engineering cost, and then they will look and they will score it to see if that is the best alternative to their current situation. This subdivision is outside the city limits. It is not touching the city limits unless somebody knows otherwise. Look at the corporate city limit map, it does not touch. It's a Lane Drive and Sharon Drive, and about a half the customers out there we serve electricity to. It was part of a swap years ago with the co-op. So basically, Christopher subdivision, if the council's not interested in pursuing this to see if there's something we can do, they need to do something else because they are in enforcement. So that's where we're at. We did bring this up last year, and it was voted down. We did do some looking. Engineering looked at it last spring, and the lift station, last spring's numbers was like $67,000, but that was not installed. It's going to take about 2,000 feet of 3-inch force main to bring it to the city. So off of that is where we did that estimated cost of roughly $175,000 of capital. If it is approved by DNR, then the next phase would be they would supply the money for the capital because they want to get rid of these small systems. That's what it amounts to that are served by Lagoon. So there's no rate set yet. That is part, and I think that's where we kind of messed up last year talking to you folks. This is a different grant than we're used to getting. Usually we get a grant to build something. This is a grant to consider something and to study something and see if it's the best alternative for everybody. This particular subdivision does discharge into Stinson Creek, which is the same creek that our plant discharges into downstream from it. So, Renee, I cover it fairly decent. The U-Board, we did bring up to the U-Board Monday, and they recommended that we do this, to take that recommendation to you folks. So that is where we're at.
And I do apologize that I did not.
That's fine. It was coming up anyway.
Yes, yes. And I want to make sure that everybody understands too, this was something that the U-Board did recommend. And I think last year there was a lot of confusion because we had a gentleman that came out from the HOA and we were concerned about the cost for the residents out there, and there was no guideline. There was no reasonable expectation of what the cost was. And I know that for me is why I voted it down, because it was giving the expectation that this is something that was possible, and that they could look to the future, but instead the expectation of cost wasn't there. And so what this is going to do is it's going to give the homeowners, it's going to give us the ability to set the cost across the board for anybody that's outside the city limits, in hopes that maybe that they will annex in eventually. Because I feel like that's the ultimate goal, is to have them annex in and?
And that question was asked yesterday about annexation, so I did look at the city limits map, and it does not touch. So there would have to be others that would have to annex in for it to touch.
Daryl, what's the connection with the Callaway Sewer District to this? If I remember, didn't we have a representative from the Callaway Sewer District when we talked about this last year?
Callaway Sewer District is looking at sites such as this, and they would like to, we met with them 3 months ago. You know, they would like to know a rate also, because they would like to take some of these small subdivisions, take over the collection, and then discharge to the city for a rate. Well, we don't have a rate to tell them what that is. So those talks have basically stopped right now because they need to know a cost. We don't have a cost. And
And I don't imagine that we'll actually be able to set a single rate, would we?
we was set
I mean, it
on
might
one
need
of
to
the
be a tiered
discussions.
rate.
On one of the discussions, which DNR has, if you read the packet of the different things, you can go ahead and leave their collection system with the homeowners association and not take over that responsibility. And at that point, at the pump station, there would be a meter. And if their system leaked, they would be charged for the leaky water too. So we would just be billing the homeowners association essentially, and they would divvy up the bill. But all this would be worked out during this grant feasibility. But that was one thing that was discussed earlier with this particular place.
Okay, thank you.
So the way to set one rate would be the simple fact that it's sort of be standardized. And we would just be taking it from point A to our system and charging right there.
That would be one way. We did reach out after last year and did a little more due diligence. And we did have a discussion, or an attorney did, with the county water system, and they would share the billing rates or the billing consumption of their water meters. And that's how we handle wastewater inside the city limits. It's off of your water consumption. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Nothing's set. So we had concerns when we met with whomever it is, the county or an HOA like this. The city has spent a lot of money trying to tighten up our water system, or our sewer system, from leaks. So we don't want to open it up to where we just lost everything we gained by taking a bunch of leaky stuff. So that would be part of the contracts too, is how do you define and handle infiltrations that's coming at you? What's your stick to get that fixed? So there's a lot of pieces to this, the study, and one of them would be, what's the cost of closing that lagoon that's there now? Which the state, that would be part of their capital investment back from the state to close that.
I think, to me, what's good for Stinson Creek is good for us, and that should be our goal as well as DNR's goal, I think.
Stinson Creek is the impaired stream, and this does discharge into it. Stinson Creek is an impaired stream to DNR, so it needs some help by DNR standards, and this does discharge to Stinson Creek. Right?
And so just so I understand on this, this is just for the study itself, correct?
Correct. This is just for the study itself. Reached out to one of the guys that we've dealt with Burns and Mack, and asked the question, if this is still, let's say this way wins, the city can go ahead and still back out. And he said, yes, that's what my understanding is. I went ahead and called MPUA's water and wastewater guy and asked him the same question, because you want an out. You know, if you don't like which direction it's going, you don't want to go to step 2.
Do we have any idea, Daryl, how long this study will take to complete?
From reviewing the documents and remembering what we talked to DNR last year about, it's like they give you the year to study it and come up with a plan, and then the next year is when you start to design the funding of fixing it, if that is the best way. So it's a multi-year process with about a calendar year in between. They award grants once a year for each step, so.
Mr. Dunlap,
Sir?
there's no cost to us for this study, right?
No.
This is all
No, it's fully
DNR,
funded
so
through DNR.
if we get the results and we don't like it, we don't have to proceed.
Right.
And it
was
doesn't
kind of
cost us anything to find out.
No, and you can look at it also as a learning way of trying to anticipate what other things you may want to do. But the only areas that qualify for this have to be outside your corporate city limits. That's one of the definitions.
All right, thank you.
But it helps us glean information for all these opportunities that we have.
It does. It gains you knowledge.
Yep. All right, any other questions on this discussion? I'll call for the question. All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
And opposed, no? Very good, thank you. Next up, we have Resolution 3472, Councilman Stone.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Resolution authorizing the destruction of city records that have met retention requirements in accordance with RSMO Chapter 109 and applicable state retention schedules. I make a motion to pass resolution number 3472 at tonight's meeting.
Have a motion and a second. This is an annual request to destroy records that have lived their life in our storage. Any questions on this, concerns? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Very good. Moving on to ordinances. Another bill we had tabled, 1662, and I would entertain a motion to untable this.
Mr. Mayor, I move to untable Bill number 1662 for discussion at tonight's meeting.
Any discussion on the untabling? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. Okay, zoning at the Willow Creek subdivision addition. We did table this last council meeting. There was some concern about the appropriateness of that commercial zoning request, and we would pick that conversation up.
Mr. Mayor, could someone remind me what the questions were about the zoning? The way I understand it and the way the map showed us last time, all of the properties around this one piece of property are also zoned as C2. And so it's just making it standardized across that area?
Yeah, I actually brought that up. It's only, from my looking at it, it's zone C2 from Business 54 side, as well as the Willow Creek subdivision currently. Looking at that and looking at what is allowed in a C2 zone, I think both of those would be inappropriate for the current Willow Creek subdivision as well as the future plan, mainly because in a C2, you're allowing businesses to operate out of houses. It can be anything from a hair salon to any coffee shop, whatever you want to be. And someone could buy a house and say, I'm going to run my coffee shop out of my house. That's not the intention of a residential area or the intention of houses. Looking at that property and everything else that's along Tennyson itself, only at the very ends is it commercial. Everything else is residential. And so it would be my belief that it should be residential 1 or residential 2. I can make a case for both. Residential 2 would allow for duplexes, whereas residential 1 is just single-family dwellings.
Dennis, could you come speak to us, please?
And also, just to add to Alan's comments, so, previously in tonight's council meeting, we had discussions around road widths, right? Well, I think that's a piece of it, is if it's currently commercial, there is an additional risk out there that now you have 10, 12 businesses in a subdivision where you already don't have enough parking, and now that really overcomplicated things. So, by going to a residential 1 or 2, that could help mitigate the risk and maybe open up discussion for, the 28-foot road widths, because that is minimizing the traffic and additional parking concerns.
Dennis Houchins,
If I could
Planning Director.
clarify, at the last meeting, motion was offered by Councilman Stone and seconded by Councilwoman Seebacher to place this bill for second reading at the next regularly scheduled council meeting. Not tabled.
That was where all my questions came from.
I'm so sorry. The first motion that was made was to move it to second reading, and then it was a motion to table it. Sorry. Help
So
me.
now it's been removed from the table, so what you're discussing at this point is that motion to move it, correct? Council,
Yes.
okay. Yep, so you're discussing a motion now to go ahead and move it to second reading at the next council meeting.
Thank you for the help.
Just,
In the middle of,
Would this be the next meeting, or
No.
would this move it to the next meeting? Okay. So we've not even approved it once? Okay,
correct.
okay, thank you.
So the first question on the C2 zoning, I'm assuming, I haven't talked to the developer, but I'm assuming the request for C2 is to stay consistent with the area that's already zoned out there. And I believe to rezone each individual property of the existing Willow Creek would have to be up to the individual property owner.
So say I did look that up, and according to MML, the city can actually come in and just say, we're going to change that. That is something that we're allowed to do. We can do it, the Planning and Zoning Commission can do it, or the property owner can do it, to align with the city's plan.
And I believe we sent that to Mr. Riley and have not heard back from him. Yeah, if you don't mind, if you have the answer to that yet.
Yeah, I think I do. Good evening, Tom Riley, City Councilor. There is one way to get rezoning in front of the council for approval, that is by the landowner. But the MML information and the charter specifically say that the council on its own motion can do that. So you could rezone property, but you have to have public meetings. You've got to have a public meeting in front of planning and zoning, 15 days notice, notify all the people. There's a recommendation to the council then has it. But I do not think it has to originate. I agree with you that it doesn't have to originate. Under the statute or under the charter, individual landowners can, but you can change all the zoning if you want. The council ultimately determines that, but you have to give notice and an opportunity to be heard for the landowners, everybody in 185 feet around there. But it can come from the council. Yeah.
If there's commercial businesses being run in those areas at this time, would they be grandfathered in if we did that rezoning?
The houses currently that are there, and that's the only thing I would be requesting, is houses from us, just from, we don't, we're already having traffic issues in that area. We don't want to create more traffic area issues in the future. A portion of this property could be deemed commercial in the future if we ever wanted to get down that far after houses are built. But with the way it sits right now, everything else on Tennyson, other than the very end and one other piece I found out in Southwind that I would hope to at some point at least have looked at, is residential. And so I think this would be fitting of residential, especially if we can't consider what the developer's telling us they're going to do with it. in just a planning perspective, which is what we're allowed to do.
Okay. Mr. Combs, I'm looking at the map that we were provided at the last meeting on the 10th. And the Ferdinand Drive and the existing Commons Drive and the existing houses and all of that that's in the subdivision on the north side of Tennyson, they are all C2 at this time.
Correct.
It's residential to the east.
Correct, and I think that should be fixed. I think that is an issue that we currently have as a city, is that those are houses being lived in as residential, and we want to prevent someone from turning one of those houses into a coffee shop, creating additional issues for the streets that are back there. I think that would be wise of us to do that. Not trying to stop somebody from having that, but that's not something we afford to most of the citizens in our town. Like, I can't operate a business out of my house where I have people coming on a regular basis. That's just not something that we allow. But being in a C2 area, that is something that is allowed. There's other reasons I can get into that I still think it doesn't fit, but that's just the main one.
I thank you for that clarification. What I was hearing you say earlier was that it was all residential around them. And I was
Yes.
disagreeing that it's not currently.
It's not currently. I just think
Your
it's wrong.
concern is you don't want that at this.
I just
you
don't
would
think it's
prefer-
appropriate.
Right.
Thank
you,
If
appropriate.
the city thought that we wanted businesses all up and down Tennyson, and that's what our plan was, then I could completely support that. But right now, it's the way we've structured. If you look at the other end of Tennyson, that is all residential already. From the other side of the fire station, all the way out to the other end of Southwind, that's all residential, other than the one piece of commercial that I mentioned.
But I think what you were trying to, the way I understood what you were saying was, it may be zoned commercial right now, but its use is residential. Single family mostly, maybe there's a few, I think there's some duplexes up there too.
Just in the Willow Creek, yes.
Right.
That one is zone commercial, but I think it would be wise of us to have that converted over to residential to eliminate the issue of businesses operating out of those homes that they've built homes that are nice.
Correct.
Let them be used as such, and to protect our residents that live there from additional traffic.
But the other thing is, I think you can have some businesses in residential areas like a hair salon, because I had one in my neighborhood for a short time, and it's R1 in that area. So I think it is allowable on some things. I may be incorrect, Dennis.
No, you're correct.
Okay.
There are some home occupations that are allowed in residential zoned areas.
And that's typical of most cities. I mean, yeah, that's natural, but not a
Sure.
full-blown, storefront type
Yeah,
thing.
but I mean, our code though says personal services, including barbershop, beauty parlor, photographic, messenger, taxi cab, laundry, dry cleaning, all of those are not allowed in residential 1. And so, I mean, I guess you can make a case for some of those other ones if someone's, doing hair around their table or something like that, but that's something per what we passed last year that said we're not allowed to. And I recognize that from, owning a photography business myself. Like, I can't operate that out of my house because it's not allowed. That's a residential 1 thing, and I respect that.
So in light of that, the intent is to build multifamily homes or single-family homes, one or the other, and really not commercial. Would R2 suffice? Do you really have to have the C2? Or C, commercial?
For this next phase, an R2 that allows for duplexes and for single family would suffice. Our revised sketch plat that I think Dennis just passed out, we're reserving, the east and the west ends for that different commercial actual use. And so those areas we would like to have that flexibility in. But for the immediate sketch plat situation, I mean, that area is going to be residential. I don't know your all's codes very well, but in a lot of cities, if you're going to try to operate a business out of a home, and if it's allowed in like a commercial zone, a lot of times there's required for a site plan, and you gotta have certain amount of parking spots and certain signage requirements and some stuff like that. So, which most homes are not gonna meet some of those concerns. Obviously, some could be a situation, as well as I know the state legislature has changed some stuff on what you guys can regulate inside the home use for business occupations just recently, because I was at a city council meeting in a different town, and they had all that debate, and they were changing their zoning code to comply with that. So we would like to have the commercial zonings just so that those end pieces are ready to go if something would want to come there. But for the immediate need, the residential would allow us to move forward for what we do, but then, we'd like those ends in the time to be commercial to market in that aspect.
So if we did try to shoot for the R2, does it have to go back to P and Z again first and delay this whole process again? Is that, Mr. Riley?
It's probably a question for your attorney, but because there's probably a public hearing situation on that. However, there's a situation, I guess, where you can amend the request, because there's a motion, you have a reading. So I don't know what your attorney's going to say.
a whole new request?
Right, planning and zoning issued a recommendation. You had the hearing, you had the public meeting, they issued a recommendation, and then there would be a different zoning request actually voted on that didn't have a public hearing at planning and zoning. Am I understand? I didn't read the planning and zoning recommendation, but you gotta have a hearing, a public meeting, both places. Public notice and a hearing, so they can make a recommendation on what the council ultimately votes for. It may be that I can find something that the council's inherent, the council's the final legislative body for those sorts of approvals. I'm not aware of any statute or case law that says inherent in that authority is to amend things that never had the public hearing at P and Z. I certainly think the safer route, unfortunately, would be to start over.
Mr. Riley, is any of that dependent on the fact that we're wanting to go less restrictive?
So that's a
Since
good question.
the public hearing was for C2, and residential falls beneath that, for lack of a better phrasing, does that matter?
Not that I'm aware of, but I did not look specifically at that issue about amending and the public hearing only happening here. I don't have a high degree of confidence that I can
Okay.
answer that.
Thank you,
Now,
Mr.
I could look into it, but I did not.
Thank you.
So for those watching, we're hearing direction from our city councilor in the back, and thank you for that. But the recommendation is that we not just change this midstream, but we have to kind of start from square one. We could do it expeditiously as possible, but it needs to go back to P and Z as a R2 request, if that's what is amenable to our council. And start back there with the exclusion of those two end pieces, then go those commercial, present those as commercial, which seems more appropriate.
That's what I was, Mr.
But
Mayor, I was thinking.
but just for those out in the audience, or watching at home, that was the recommendation, that we can't just change this tonight on the fly. It has to sort of go back to the starting point, so.
Yes,
Mr. Mayor, not to confuse it anymore, but if we voted to move this to second reading, could we introduce a public hearing for residential 2 or a different designation during that process? And if we were to meet those necessary pieces, planning and zoning meet, we have a public hearing before this either gets final approval or final declination, would we be able to then at the last step be able to change it. It allows it to move forward. We're not affecting the timeline, but I don't want us to introduce pieces and parts of something in the middle of this if it's not appropriate. And if I'm muddying the waters, then we can just,
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think, you know, you're presenting two different things. Tom's coming up for us here.
Mr. Stone, could you repeat that question?
there's a timing issue here. If we ask planning and zoning to take this back and start over, then there's a timing delay that's gonna occur.
Yes.
So where my brain went was, right now, we have an ordinance change requesting it to go to C2, and we're at first reading. So we go to second reading at the next scheduled meeting. If in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, however long that is, if planning and zoning can bring forward another opportunity and we do a public hearing, could we then amend this ordinance mid-cycle to meet that, because we've met the public hearing?
Right. I think you probably could. Again, that's so specific and fact-specific that I would like to look at that. But the statutes require notice, 15 days of public hearing. It doesn't really require any sort, it's certainly P and Z hearing first, council public meeting and approval, but I don't know that that would tie into first, second, and final reading. So my initial thought is that you could do that. Because you're going to meet the requirement, you're going to meet the substantive requirements. You had a public meeting about these issues at every step in the process, and then you just kind of catch up with the ordinance.
That's where my brain was.
Yeah.
But wouldn't we need to amend this, because I'm not gonna vote yes on a C2. I'd wanna say I wanna amend this to R2 now, and then have the hearings. Because we did that on the budget last year, we did the first 2 readings, and we did the hearing on the last night, as I recollect. So I guess that wouldn't be out of order, but I would think that we would want to amend this to R2 and then send it back to have the hearings before, because I'm not going to vote for it in the current language.
I guess the question for Louis Beatty is, I mean, we're talking about timelines, right? In my mind, maybe you can help me understand the road width. I could see being a direct impact to timeliness of starting construction, laying the groundwork, but would the zoning really, I mean, we got to get it changed, but would that impact progress on your end? Since you would own the, quote, own the property, so.
Right. I don't think it would affect progress as long as it's going to go in one of those directions for what we're doing in the next phase. One thing I do have a concern after thinking about it is the commercial area that we would like to have on the east side. If it was zoned residential in the middle, it wouldn't be necessarily adjacent to some commercial that were basically coming from on to the north at that point in time. So
It would
I don't
be
know.
adjacent on the west, it just would not be adjacent to a commercial property on the east.
Right, because your park ground's probably not zoned commercial.
No, right now it's R1.
Right. And so that might pose a problem for that corner that we would like to have commercial. So if there's a avenue to allow that, because it's sized large enough or whatever, we can maintain a strip on the back lots of 232, 233, 234, you know, to where something like that could be done.
So it would need to be sort of contingent on that
away.
C2 being approved on that spot. And I get
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you see what I'm saying? Because I don't want to lock them out
Right.
on something there.
You'd probably have to carve that out and bring it back separately, both the east and the west.
Right, yeah.
And say, I think my recommendation on that would to take that back to planning and zoning and have them look at it and say, this is what our plan is for Tennyson. We have a developer wanting to do this, but is our plan for Tennyson? Because we get to pick that.
Yes.
If that's going to be residential, do they want commercial in the middle of that, and then they can approve that or send it back to us for that suggestion or recommendation.
Right.
Because as we continue to move south, that whole end, I mean, at some point, the other side of the road may go up for sale and a developer comes in. Do we want to go ahead and start planning what that could be too? And again, that's a planning and zoning question more than it's us.
Yeah, those carve-outs would have to come later down the line, and he'd have to go through the whole process with it, yes.
But I think from their standpoint, they don't want to have that in question. If they're going to move forward, they're going to have that guarantee that that's going to be part of the deal,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we don't want to get locked out on reserving some commercial areas,
Yeah,
and then
I
they're
get
stuck
that.
being residential. And, and then part of it is kind of wanted a mixed use. Tennyson's got some high traffic areas, so there's some potential there, but right now, there's not a market for all that being, stores, box stores, things like that, So we're trying to move along with the residential, but yet still preserve a couple premium spots that would be good for commercial in the future, as well as they're a little less desirable for the residential, and that's why we're kind of put that
That
in
seems reasonable.
fashion. Yeah.
That seems reasonable, and I think if it had been presented that way as the major part of it, we want R2 and these spots C2,
Right.
that would be, fine.
I have a little bit of a concern, not so much with the corner down here, where the pond is.
Okay.
I don't know which side.
Okay,
again.
that's the west, the
This
pond
I
is on the west side.
understand being commercial.
Yeah.
My bigger concern is sticking something commercial. Let's say it was a gas station. And then 238, 237, 236, 235, 234, all of those houses now, all of a sudden, are backing up to something maybe that wasn't expected. And so I think to stick something commercial in there is going to be a little bit harder. I understand absolutely down here on this corner. But I think that that's kind of why we're talking about these, we're seeing residential here. There's a need for residential. I'm concerned about this, so I would like to see that specifically brought back to council whenever it's time to decide on that. That's just my opinion.
Okay, not to muddy the waters. Based on what was provided in the council packet at the last meeting, I'm seeing that this has one legal description, correct, for that entire parcel. So I think if you guys are wanting to explore having certain areas of this parcel zoned differently, we need to have them separately identified with a legal description. And I understand, Councilman Stone, what your recommendation is to continue down this process. In the end, I think a planning and zoning meeting can be set up pretty expeditiously without kind of muddying those waters of, we started an ordinance, but then we amended it at the very end. Just for looking back record-keeping purposes, just trying to keep it as clean as possible.
Yeah, I think since we're wanting to have two different zonings, it needs to start over with, unfortunately. We do have a planning and zoning meeting scheduled 2 weeks from tomorrow. I don't know if that can meet our timeline. Nope. Right. 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 So that'd be one thing, and then if we as a council want to take the other piece, we might as well do all that at the same time, in my thought, if we're gonna have to go back to square one anyway. But this is really more a council request than, and obviously working with the developer and the engineer, so we wouldn't have any fees involved with this, correct? Since it's originating with the council?
Yeah, because
I think that'd be up to, I mean,
I don't want to have you pay whatever the fee is when we're the ones wanting to change it and start all over.
right, because you are allowed as a body to change
discussed.
zoning as long as you go through that process without the applicant's or the
Right.
owner's application process. So, yeah,
Right.
I would just have to get you the,
That makes sense? what I'm
Description.
it
saying?
does. I know you're trying to make this as easy as possible. We
Yeah.
want to work with you, for sure.
Appreciate that.
But But, you know, it just doesn't seem right to approve this as written, so I think we gotta, it seems like, I mean, that's up to y'all, but.
Right.
But we'll try to maybe schedule a P and Z meeting, if that's the way we want to go, another week or so out from the next scheduled one, or delay that one for an extra few days to catch that 15-day notice.
It's gonna take
window.
us some time, though, to get separate descriptions for
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I can't just whip that up.
No, you're gonna have to get guys like Tom, and he's not gonna do that right away, so.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, and then we have our next council meeting, the 14th, so it's,
yeah. It's,
I think we're pushing them into late February for the first reading, and then into March.
what would be
Early
quicker,
March.
and it would be a risk on Louis Bates' part, is to go ahead and try to go for the R2 as a whole, this whole piece. It's already, you know, the whole description is there. That could be done, and then come back, you know, in a month or two, however long it takes to get those two pieces pulled out, and come back for the C2 on that. That's just my, you know, thought.
If there's a way to move forward with the R2 from this point forward, that'd be great. If we gotta go back, yeah, I mean, we can do the application. We can do it all at the same time, just
I think it'd be cleaner to start, just to
Yeah.
kill this one and start.
Yeah, I agree, yeah, I mean, but to come back immediately with an R2 recommendation for the whole thing, and not have to wait on these two parcels to get surveyed out, and, you know, because that could take a month or two, or 3 months.
It could, hopefully not that long, but, and then, obviously, we'd establish some lines for zoning. If the residential part would creep into it, 10 or 15 feet, the backyards would be, I mean, that, because, you know, obviously, the subdivision's not done. So establishing those lines, we still got a lot of design work to do, which I got streets that affect that.
Yeah,
So,
right.
But, I mean, it is okay for 10 feet in the backyard to be commercial, and the house where it sits is residential, okay? I mean, and then you can always clean that up if you wanted to when you do your master plan every 10 or 15 years or whatever, and look at that if that's ever a concern. I don't think it ever would be, but, so as long as everybody's willing to work with us, I think we can make that happen.
And as a reminder for the council, as we discussed, really the time important piece is really deciding on the road widths, working with Lewis and Beatty, working with city's engineering. But with that being said, with the thought of keeping this residential, letting that carry forward as we continue the discussion on the street widths, to see if where we can find that happy medium so that we don't, you know, keep you from progressing on the project as well.
So, what I'm hearing is we probably will kill this bill tonight. At our next meeting, the street bill would come back for, you know, discussion again, if we wanted to either approve the 28-foot or, you know, in the meantime, do some negotiating to see if 32 would be helpful, or the driveway, extended driveway option would be best. That seem right, good with everybody? Councilman Combs, is that? Okay. All right. Clear as mud here. So I think we do all understand. Is there any other discussion on this? The motion is on the floor to pass it, so if we vote no,
It's
it would just
actually-
die.
Oh.
So,
If we table it indefinitely, we can't bring it back in this condition.
yeah, but it's not going to come back in this condition anyway, so let's just vote it no and let it die a peaceful death here and restart it as quick as possible, in my opinion. It's the cleanest way to do it, so. But you all have the vote. All those in favor say yes. Opposed, no?
No.
All right, we'll move forward, and we appreciate your patience. Okay. First reads, tonight we have bill number 1667. Councilwoman Nelson, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Bill number 1667, an ordinance amending Chapter 102 subdivisions, Article 3, Section 56, streets and alleys, Item N4 of the Fulton City Code by repealing certain regulations and establishing an effective date. I make a motion, we move bill number 1667 to second reading at the next regularly scheduled council meeting.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And this bill would be to repeal the council rights to deviate. Is that right? Is that what I'm reading?
Yeah, that's what I had put this for.
Mhm.
I think having that, that clause in there that we have the right to deviate from what we plan does, like we mentioned earlier, it does open us up to some subjection, in a better way of putting it. I think it could open us up to lawsuit if we start saying, well, we're going to say yes for you and no for you, and unless we have a plan laid out, I think this is the best plan for us going forward. I know we put that in there before to allow for that, but yeah.
Well, I'm the one that asked for this language to be added, and the reason I wanted it is so that it came to here for approval, but I never had the intention of ever approving any. Okay, I'll just tell you straight out, I want us to have a standard and follow the standard and not deviate, and I'm afraid that if we don't have this requirement, then it'll get approved or get missed, or however it happened with Willow Creek before, I don't know. I wasn't on the council at that time, and I don't know that I would have said, well, how wide are the streets, you know, if I had been here. So how are we going to make sure that we're going to follow our standard is my only concern. Because that's why I wanted the language in here, was to avoid what we've been dealing with tonight in the future. I understand where you're coming from, but so what's to prohibit it happening again?
No, my goal with this was to just eliminate that last piece of it. That took away our ability to deviate from it. So the rest of your statement stands perfectly true going forward. Like, it would go forward as the roads would be that width. We wouldn't deviate from that. It does cause some other issues in a few other places, but unless we have a city plan that outlines, you know, the next 20 years or next 10 years that says we want roads to be this and roads to be that, and we end up with allowing other people to create roads at different widths based on other standards. And if you weren't planning on allowing it to be any different, I think we're in agreement that going forward, we want those roads to be that width because that's where the future looks like it should be going.
Right, so how did it happen, I guess in 2018, I don't know.
I think that comes back to the engineering drawings where we have guidelines in there for different size roads and that sort of thing. This statement removes, with the last statement that we put in here, removed that, but then it gave us reason to have that deviation.
Right.
I was just asking for us to remove that deviation so people don't come to us asking for it.
Right. And
Yeah, instead of coming to you guys, they would have to go to the Board of Adjustments.
Correct, yeah.
And is the Board of Adjustment going to allow it? I mean, that's
And that would be up to them.
that's my problem.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, they have to prove a hardship, though. And it'd be pretty hard to prove a hardship on a new construction road, I think.
Well, I mean, you heard it tonight. It could be $2,000 to $5,000 per lot extra, you know, so is that a hardship? I don't know.
But I have to say, this council is the one who approved this deviation, because this wording came from just the last time we approved all this.
Correct.
But-
And I knew it did.
It's not about what happened in 2018, it's what we approved, 6 months ago?
Correct. And if we weren't planning on allowing it, and to me, it like opens up for, again, subjection to who says
Sure.
this should be allowed and who shouldn't.
Right.
Then we can just remove that piece and say, going forward, this is what we want.
I understand. I understand where I agree. I just don't want it to happen. That's where I'm at, because we should have standards and we should follow them unless there's a hardship that, you know, I can't imagine that. Because we've got a lot of streets in this town over the years, like we were discussing earlier. At the time, Collier Lane, I think was your example, was built, it was fine, but now it's, you know, and who knows what 50 years from now, I can't envision roads needing to be 100 feet wide, but, you know, that's an exaggeration, of course. That's my only concern. I want to make sure we don't end up in the same boat again.
So just to clarify, so this would remove that language from the council's participation in that discussion, but there's still a process allowed to deviate if decided necessary via, what is that, engineering? Is that our professionals would then take care of that and it just takes that away from us? I mean, let the professionals handle it? But there is still a process to allow that for contractors and such to pursue that, is that correct?
Say if we remove this, I think the only way to have that adjusted would be to go to the other board like he was describing before. And they would be able, if they could prove a hardship, they could approve the deviation. But
And that-
otherwise, it would
And
remove
that board
that.
is a group of citizens that are appointed by you guys. I believe, is that right? I mean, I don't think I remember even approving, that's not a board that gets a lot of changeover or activity
No
at
activity
all.
that I know of.
So, you know, do you trust folks that don't hardly ever meet or talk about things of this nature? Maybe, I don't know. That deserves a little bit of thought as well, in my opinion. Not to say that our board isn't competent, but, no, but it's just something to think about, yeah.
And then we also get back into the muddying the waters. What if they say yes to one person and no to the next? What's the difference between, what if it's a hardship one year because of inflation, but then everything is great 3 years from now? You know, how is, that's tough.
Right.
Yep. Well, I think it's a case of, it sounds good till it happens, and it's a little awkward, it's tough, so, I don't know.
I believe that we go right back to what Kyle was saying. I believe we need to leave it up to the professionals to set up how we ought to run it, what we ought to do.
But I guess just to repeat, there is still a process. That if a developer wanted to ask these same questions that we've been asked tonight, there is someone they can go to and officially request that deviation and could receive that approval if it was granted.
Then that deviation, though, if it was approved, that would still go through engineering, correct? To be plotted, drawn. I mean, Kyle, could you speak to, I mean, would you still be involved? If the council pulls ourselves back from these road discussions, we have this other process for quote deviations. How's engineering's involvement still with the process?
Kyle Bremer, city engineer. We would, the plans and, well, first the plat would come to engineering. It would still go through the platting process. The plans would still go to engineering, and we would review them. But we would have to adhere to a parking on both sides, basically, is what it amounts to. So whatever lane width that is, I think is still up for discussion, unless I'm interpreting that incorrectly. You guys would have to advise me on that, but that's still in debate for what we talked about earlier. But I think what Councilman Combs is proposing is that instead of allowing a deviation from parking on both sides, it's going to be required that a street has parking on both sides, unless the Board of Adjustment approves otherwise.
which brings us right back to deviations. So I think that, and I see both sides of it. Councilman Combs, I see what you're saying, and Councilman West, I see what you're saying as well. I think we're getting hung up on the word deviation. I think that perhaps instead of removing the deviation clause, maybe we send this back and we rework it so that we still have the standards that we adhere to, but that maybe final approval comes to us, or because it sounds like what we're doing by removing that is just we're absolving ourselves from making the decision and giving it to someone else. I do see your point, but it's still a possibility with these words in it or not. So is it more context rather than just removing that altogether? So can we maybe work on revisiting how we want it to read rather than removing this to absolve our responsibility?
Or how do
I have
we
a
even get to?
question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I have a question too. If a contractor comes to the city and they want to develop a piece of property, those plans go to you first, the city? Is that correct?
Yeah, so if a developer comes, first they're gonna meet with us, try to figure out our requirements. They're gonna go through the plating process, so they're not gonna have a full set of plans and a full design done at that point, but they're gonna lay out the subdivision if that's what they're doing. Once that layout is approved, then they're gonna go through the design process to meet our standards and specifications.
Okay, so if we took out the wording deviation and it was the two-way parking on both sides, the contractor is then going to look at that and they're going to plot it out as if that's unless there's a huge, like an existing piece of property like this particular one that we're adding on to, in general, they're probably going to spec it out with the correct street footage because that's what it says in our regulations. Is that correct? There's not going to be as many people coming and requesting a deviation because that verbiage is gone, in your experience.
But do you think that would limit the attractiveness of some of these plots? Do you think that they would not find them nearly as profitable or potentially profitable because it cuts into their usable property size?
And I think one thing that needs to be considered is that, a subdivision is not always a residential subdivision. There is commercial subdivisions that potentially there is no need for on-street parking type of thing. It's a different situation. So, in that situation, if it's a commercial subdivision potentially where there is not going to be, these are potentially bigger lots, bigger areas that you would not want parking to be on. That would be a scenario that would have to be adjusted for, or have to go to the Board of Adjustments potentially.
And then they would have to prove a hardship in order to get that approved, even if it were the commercial subdivision that we didn't need parking on the streets. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Just to the satisfaction of the Board of Adjustments, I mean, it'd be subjective a little bit. And I think the spirit of the ordinance and or the bill could be bringing it through the Board of Adjustments. If it has to be a deviation, that it has to go, we could make it go to the Board of Adjustments and then to us. So there would just be that extra step, but the ultimate decision would be the council for the deviation.
Or is there a happy medium too, where we all want the wider streets, we want the safer subdivisions, but at the end of the day, trust our professionals to make the best decisions for the city and and kind of pull us back, because, you know, obviously if we were a really large city and we got involved on these day-to-day decisions, I mean, that could be very taxing for a council. I mean, we are a small city, but, you know, I'm just kind of trying to find the happy medium where we, you know, let
But we have,
Kyle do his work and take
we
care of
have
it.
also disagreed with every recommendation that we've been brought this evening to, by our professionals. Planning and zoning brought us a recommendation that they approved. Kyle gave his personal thought that the 28-foot road parking on one side for this new plat was just fine, and that it was appropriate. And we've disagreed with both of those items this evening and 2 weeks ago.
It's a valid point.
So, I mean, at some point, we either need to acknowledge the recommendations that were given and the advice that were given and accept it, or we need to keep the control here, which is what we seem to be requesting. So if we want the control of the decisions to be with this group of people, then we need to leave this alone. If we want to accept our recommendations from our boards and commissions and department directors, then we need to do that also.
I would like to say, we all don't disagree, I'm not so much concerned about, I am concerned about our professionals. I would like to leave a lot of, respect what they have to say, and I didn't disagree with the 28. I kind of, if we can move forward and accept what we can do, I was going with the 28, but someone suggested maybe the 32. If that's the direction we're going to go, we need to go somewhere with it instead of just dragging this on. The 28 is what he recommends. I respect what he has to say, because I think he knows more about the operation than I do. So, that's my
If I could offer one more thought too, I did mention earlier that we are performing a TEEP study that is on your agenda tonight, and that could be one of the outcomes of that TEEP study. That you know, we've talked about two different things here, two different things that are all intertwined, right? Zoning, road widths. So, you know, one thing to consider is that if you tied the street width more to the appropriate zoning, you know, if you considered in this case Willow Creek down here, that the appropriate zoning is more residential zoning for this area, then the street should be X. If the appropriate zoning, and according to the master plan, is commercial, then then the streets can be Y. You know, then you have more of a design that fits together and works together. That's going to take a little bit of time to do, and maybe won't fix this one thing right now, but I would offer that as a potential something that I think we should potentially look at.
And I want you to understand, I respect your opinion too, but it's just like everybody else, you know, we have to weigh all these things, so I don't want you to misunderstand anything that's been said. I still respect your opinion.
We're good, Mike.
Okay, and I respect everybody else's opinion here too. So,
A
I
lot
just
of
want to make
times,
sure.
the discussion brings out these other ideas and thoughts and
Right.
things you don't normally think are gonna pop
I just
up.
wanted to
So
offer
that's
something, you know, because you all are in charge of making sure that the city is following a plan, a more of a master plan, more of a all-encompassing thought, you know. So that's one thing to consider, is try to tie those two together.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention though is that we paid a consultant to come up with these standards for us. And there was some debate at planning and zoning on these street widths as well. And they wanted to make them not as wide, And the city engineer wanted to be wider and more what the recommendation from the consultant was, as I recall. And that's what the council went along with, was what the consultant and our city engineer recommended. And that's where we came up with the 36-foot wide streets. I mean, I could go to an extreme. Somebody could ask for, well, I want to have one-way streets that are 20 foot long and only, you know, I could see, I can't imagine somebody doing that, but it's possible, I guess. You know, somebody could really go real crazy about really wanting to cut the streets down in order to save the money to make the development cheaper. And I understand that because I've done that, some of that work myself, so I get it. You know, you want to make something affordable, especially as he discussed.
Take
Up
downtown,
front,
for instance.
you're
There was a
charging all
thought
that money.
process at one time, turning that back to two-way.
Yeah,
I mean, those type of things can come up, and
Right.
you want to strip yourself of the power to make those changes.
correct. Yep. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
So there's a motion on the floor to move this to second reading?
There is, so, yeah, this could take some more thought. You know, we're about 30 minutes or 40 minutes into this discussion on this bill. So I think we'll put it to a vote here. The motion and the second was to move this forward. Any other dying wishes to have to speak their piece on this at this time? Okay, all those in favor say yes? Yes. Would you raise your hands, please?
Thank you. Three approved,
And no?
No.
Opposed?
No.
5 opposed.
Okay, that bill dies, but we do appreciate the intent there and the discussion on that. All right, moving forward, second reads, Bill number 1663, Councilwoman Reclus? Okay. Absolutely.
Authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city of Fulton, Missouri, to execute all necessary documents in relation to the Missouri Department of Transportation applications for federal state assistance for airport ARPA funds and establishing an effective date. I make a motion that bill number 1663 be placed for third reading at this meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We did hear about this at our last meeting. Are there any questions or discussion more on this? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. And if you would again, please.
Yes. Bill number 1663, an ordinance authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city of Fulton, Missouri, to execute all necessary documents in relation to the Missouri Department of Transportation application for federal state assistance for airport ARPA funds and establishing an effective date. I make a motion to place bill number 1663 for final passage at this meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. You've all heard the bill read 3 times. At this time, Madam Clerk, if you would take roll call for final vote.
Mr. Luther? Yes. Ms. Nelson?
Yes.
Ms. Reclus? Yes. Ms. Saybacher? Yes. Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Washington? Yes. Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Combs? Yes. Thank you. We have eight affirmative and 0 opposed.
All right, at this time, we'll have Councilman Combs present bill number 1664. Absolutely.
Second.
Thank you. And again, we heard about this at our last meeting, the grant for our traffic study. And if there's no more questions or concern, I'll call for that question. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. And if you would again.
The city of Fulton, Missouri, to execute all necessary documents in relation to the Missouri Department of Transportation Traffic Engineering Assistance Program Agreement for the TEAP 069 Traffic Study Grant and establishing an effective date. I make a motion to place bill number 1664 for final passage at this meeting.
And any more discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. At this time, Madam Clerk, if you would take roll call for final vote.
Ms. Nelson?
Yes.
Ms. Reclue? Yes. Ms. Seebacher?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Washington? Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Combs? Mr. Luther? Yes. 8 affirmative, 0 opposed.
Very good, that'll pass. And finally, bill number 1665, Councilman Luther, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Bill number 1665, an ordinance authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city of Fulton, Missouri to execute all necessary documents in relation to the Missouri Department of Transportation application for federal state assistance for project designed by Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley Incorporated regarding airport runway lighting project number 22-04 Alpha-1 and establishing an effective date. I make a motion to place bill number 1665 for third reading at this council meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for third reading tonight. Any discussion on this? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. And if you would again.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Bill number 1665, an ordinance authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city of Fulton, Missouri to execute all necessary documents in relation to the Missouri Department of Transportation application for federal state assistance for project designed by Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley Incorporated regarding airport runway lighting project number 22-04 Alpha-1 and establishing an effective date. I make a motion to place bill number 1665 for final passage at this council meeting.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
And opposed, no. And at this time, Madam Clerk, if you would take final roll call.
Ms. Reclue? Yes. Ms. Seebacher?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Washington? Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Combs? Mr. Luther? Ms. Nelson? Yes. Thank you. 8 affirmative, 0 opposed.
We have one announcement. The next city council meeting will be held Tuesday, February 14th, 2023 at 7 p.m. The work session will begin at 6:30 p.m. And we do have a need tonight for executive session. Items tonight will be legal and personnel. And we
Make a motion to go to executive session.
Second.
have a motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always.
Yeah, quickly. And, yeah, so we need to vote on that,
Just a vote.
if you would, Madam Clerk.
Before we do, you seconded that, Valerie, is that correct?
Yeah.
That's fine, yes. And who made the motion? Jeff, thank you.
Jeff did.
All right. To go into executive session, Ms. Seebacher?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Washington? Mr. West?
Yes.
Mr. Combs? Yes. Mr. Luther?
Yes.
Ms. Nelson? Yes. Ms. Reclue? Thank you.
All righty.